All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our closing plenary session of the 23rd Annual International Law and Religion Symposium. My name is Brett Scharffs, and I'm the director of our center, and I will be moderating this afternoon's panel. Our work has come and gone rather quickly. We've had a very busy few days. We'll have a nice closing dinner this evening right at the hotel where you're staying, and then a day for the delegates, an excursion up to Salt Lake City, and a nice closing lunch with leaders of the LDS Church at the church office building up in Salt Lake City tomorrow. As we conclude this symposium, I'm mindful that there are a lot of people to be thanked. And what I've decided to do is to thank no one by name. This is out of desperate self-defense because I would surely miss some of the important names. But I do want to recognize and thank by group and categories many of the people who have helped make this symposium possible. From our center, the staff has worked tirelessly and professionally, and we're very grateful to them. In addition to the center, we have our International Advisory Council who have been here, who have been participating, listening carefully, asking questions, and getting to know you. And to them, for their financial assistance, we're grateful, but to their presence and their participation, we are even more grateful. I'd like to express appreciation to the law school, to everyone from the dean of the law school to the custodians, my colleagues who have been inconvenienced, and we're thankful that we have this facility and the support of the law school, which makes this possible. We're also grateful to the church and for their participation and contributions to our conference. Tickets to General Conference are actually scarce, and they provided a large number to us, and we're grateful to them for that. We're grateful for the lunch for delegates that they will host tomorrow. And we're grateful to the General Counsel's Office and to the Area Legal Counsel officers of the church, many of whom have participated in this symposium, along with the public affairs officials of the church. I'm thankful to the university, everyone from the president to the parking staff, the university police, the catering department, the health department, which has been on standby to help us. I don't think we've had any serious health emergencies this year. Again, the custodial staff. There's a lot of effort from a lot of people behind the scenes that makes this happen. There are three groups that I would like to recognize and thank in particular. The first of these are our students. As I mentioned at the opening of the symposium, they are the crown jewel as far as we are concerned, and we're grateful for them. Many have served in volunteer capacities, and in particular, we are appreciative to those who have served on the management board. We're thankful to those who have been drivers, who have been hosts, to those who have handed out headsets, to those who have helped with informal interpretation, for the performing groups that performed last night at Thanksgiving Point and that will perform this evening at the Marriott Hotel. We're thankful that you have had a chance to see and get to know them and to have a sense of their intellect, their spirit, their vitality, and as we also noted before, they are our hope for the future. We're also grateful to the students of the Law Review. This is the publication that comes out from the law school, and the many of the presentations that you have made, you will be invited to submit as articles, and each year the Law Review produces an edition of the Law Review dedicated specifically to this symposium. So you'll be contacted by the students, and we hope that you will deal with them in a professional manner. It's difficult for them to manage an issue with so many foreign participants. They're used to dealing with submissions from American law professors, and they all write the same way and use the same citation format, and so it's a lot of work for them to try to put out a issue that includes people from so many countries and from so many different native languages. So I'd like to ask you to join me in a round of applause for all of the students and all of their efforts. The second group I would like to single out for thanks are our interpreters. It's difficult in a way to imagine what a challenging task it is to have high-quality interpretation in 14 languages. Add to that the technicality and the difficulty of the terminology that we use in this area, and then compound that by the speed with which some of us speak. The interpreters have had a very difficult job. We realize that the interpretation has not been perfect. This is an ongoing and recurring lesson and effort. But I'm very grateful to the formal interpreters who have interpreted the sessions, as well as the volunteer informal interpreters who have helped us along the way. And I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a special appreciation to the interpreters. The last group that I'd like to thank specifically are the delegates, the 95 delegates from 45 countries, many of whom are friends, some old friends and some new friends. But we are very appreciative of you for coming the distance you've come, for planning the presentations that you've made, and for sharing in such a spirit of goodwill and desire to understand and listen and work together that we've seen here. One of the things we enjoy most about working in this area is meeting new people. We enjoy even more seeing them a second time when we renew an acquaintance, and we enjoy even more the third time by which we feel like old friends. And we appreciate the many old friends that are here, and we hope that the rest who are new acquaintances or people who we're meeting for only the second or third time, that we'll have a long and a productive and a varied opportunity to work with you in the coming years, both here and in your homes as well. So please join me in giving a special appreciation to all of the delegates. Our plan for this session is I'm going to speak for 20 minutes or so with some of my reflections on our enterprise and our topic. And then we're going to we have invited 10 delegates to come and give reflections of 2 or 3 minutes each on their thoughts about the symposium. And we'll do that in 2 panels of 5. And then after we have finished that, we have asked our founding director, Professor Cole Durham, to give some final concluding thoughts and a summary of the themes of the Symposium. As we complete our work together for now, I'd like to offer some observations in closing. Religious freedom. Is this the grandfather of human rights or the neglected stepchild? As with most false dichotomies, the answer is both. And in addition to being the grandfather and neglected stepchild, it is perhaps the underappreciated core of human rights. Today, what I would like to discuss is a deceptively simple and surprisingly controversial, even as Heiner Bielefeld put it, provocative question. Why should we care about religious freedom? For the seeker of religious truth, the answer may be obvious. Religious freedom creates the conditions, the constitutional space for investigation and pursuit of truth. But what about those who fall into other groups? What about the religiously committed, who are confident they are in possession already of religious truth? Or the religiously indifferent, who are not much interested in religion or spirituality? Or what about the religiously hostile, those who believe religion does more harm than good? Should we care about religious freedom? I would like to provide 3 reasons for suggesting that they, and all of us, should care deeply about freedom of religion and belief. I'd like to make 2 preliminary notes. The human rights document's inclusion of "and belief" is important, since it carves out space to protect and respect religious as well as non-religious bases for belief. In the words of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, it protects theistic, non-theistic, and atheistic belief, as well as the right not to profess any belief. A second preliminary note. There are many instrumental reasons why religion and religious freedom is important. For example, one recent study estimates that religion in America contributes $1.2 trillion to the American economy. Much of this in the form of education, health care, care of the homeless, care of those with drug and alcohol addictions, counseling, marriage counseling, and so forth. But my focus today is a little different, not on the good that religion does, but on why we should care about religious freedom itself, or the freedom to choose religion. The reasons I will focus upon today are these. First, the role of religious freedom as a historical foundation for constitutional, political, civil, and human rights. I will suggest that without freedom of religion and belief, the entire human rights project may collapse from its own weight. Second, freedom of religion and belief, I believe, is necessary if we are to resist statism and other monistic views of state power. And third, we may not have the intellectual, political, or rhetorical resources to defend conscience if we do not respect freedom of religion and belief. First, as a matter of history, religious freedom is among the first and foundational human rights. The story of the emergence of freedom of religion and belief as a human right is complex. But think about the other important civil and political rights that we bundle together with religious freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association, among others. As a matter of history, freedom of speech arose in large measure as an effort to protect religious dissenters and their right to express and advocate for their religious views. As a matter of history, freedom of the press was a battle fought in large measure over the printing of the Bible. Freedom of assembly, likewise, was in large measure historically a struggle for the right of minority religious communities to gather and worship together. Freedom of association, closely related, includes the right to associate with those who share our beliefs and commitments, including religious communities and religiously affiliated institutions such as schools and universities. Even non-discrimination norms, which we often conceptualize as being in tension with freedom of religion and belief, arose in large measure as efforts to stamp out discrimination on the basis of religion. For example, discrimination against Catholics in the United States. The non-discrimination provisions of international human rights documents, as well as the U.S. Civil Rights Act, as well as non-discrimination laws from around the world, all include prohibitions of discrimination on the basis of religion as a key component of the concept of non-discrimination. My claim, directed to the committed, the indifferent, and the hostile, is simply this: freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, including foundationally freedom of religion, is historically the taproot of the tree of human rights that was planted with the Magna Carta, drafted after all by a religious leader, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, nourished by the Declaration of Independence, with its inalienable rights with which human beings are endowed by their Creator, and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man, which, although a much more secular document, describes the foundational rights that it identifies as being sacred. These rights, given global recognition in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and turned into globally recognized and protected rights in international treaties such as the ICCPR and the ECHR, among others, and scores of post-World War II constitutions. This is my question. Can we expect the leaves and branches to thrive or even survive if the roots have been cut? On Monday morning, Simon McCrossan described what he called cut flower culture, enjoying something beautiful after cutting it from its roots, without perhaps recognizing that cut flowers are destined to fade, wither, and soon die. This can be the consequence of forgetting the foundations of freedom, or of disconnecting our freedoms from their moral foundations. Consider the controversy over the presence of the crucifix in public schools in Italy. From an American perspective, such a display would clearly violate the Establishment Clause. But consider the surprising strength of the Italian position. The argument, most clearly articulated in lower court opinions in Italy, was that it was Catholic doctrine concerning the dignity of man and Catholic culture with its commitment to equality that in large measure created the conditions where human rights could be recognized, embraced, and given legal protection. The crucifix is a symbol of that religious doctrine and culture that created the soil out of which human rights could grow. To prohibit the crucifix, the government argued, is not only to forget or reject that history, but it is a kind of arrogant patricide. The children who enjoy the human rights that have been enshrined by the parent, banishing, exiling, or ejecting that parent in the very name of the rights they enjoy. Now, I don't mean to take sides in that particular dispute. I think there are serious arguments on both sides, especially with respect to the mandatory character of the displays. But I think it helps us understand that there's a lot more at stake than just simply the religious symbol understood narrowly as a religious symbol. A trendy argument these days is that freedom of religion or belief is an unnecessary or redundant human right, since much of what is protected by freedom of religion and belief would be protected by freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, etc. If we imagine rights as a kind of bundle, then perhaps removing one stick, freedom of religion and belief, will not materially weaken the strength of the bundle. But I think we must concede that religious claims are among the strongest and most morally serious claims made by human beings, since they appeal not only to deeply held conscientious beliefs, but often also to what God asks or demands of us. If we are unwilling to protect religious speech, should we expect other types of speech to be protected? Types of speech that may be less central to human identity and meaning? If we are unwilling to protect freedom of the press for religious speech, should we expect other types of publications to be given robust protection? If freedom of association is denied for the religious, can we expect other types of association to be given legal protection? I believe these questions answer themselves. If we are unwilling to protect religious freedom, which lies at the core of human identity and meaning, then we should not expect our institutions to protect other important civil and political rights. My second answer to the question, why religious freedom, concerns marshaling intellectual and cultural resources to resist statism. I've recently become concerned that in our lifetime, we are in the midst of a larger conflict than we often recognize. What I have in mind is a world-defining struggle between two dramatically different visions of the state and its relationship with its people. The contest I have in mind is between what I will call monism, which is inclined toward various types of statism, and dualism, or the idea that the state's domain over our lives is in some important way subject to limits that lie outside and beyond the state itself. Dualism is an old idea, found in Jesus Christ's answer to the lawyer who asked whether it was lawful to pay taxes. Jesus' answer expresses a worldview that was already normatively powerful, yet also disruptive 2,000 years ago. As recorded in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus took a coin and said to them, "Whose is the image and superscription?" And they said unto him, "Caesar's." And Jesus answering said unto them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. This reflects what I'm calling dualism, the idea that there are certain claims that Caesar or the state authority makes upon us, and other claims that God or divine authority makes upon us. Today, the key characteristics of a dualist understanding of the state is that the state is justified in large measure by its success in protecting individual liberty, that government is subject to specific limitations and the rule of law. Political systems can be founded on either dualist or monist understandings of the scope of the state's power, jurisdiction, and authority. In the 4th century, there was a world-defining struggle between the Roman Empire and emergent Christianity. For the Romans, Caesar was God, so there was no dualism between the things that are Caesar's and the things that are God's. But since the 4th century, in Europe at any rate, this dualism has persisted. To be sure, when we posit dualism, we don't have the answers to all our questions, but we focus on what the question is. What are the proper boundaries between religion and the state, between conscience and state power, between individuals' inalienable rights and the legislative and regulatory demands of the state? Answering the questions will require ongoing navigation, but one answer is off the table, and that is the statist answer found in statists of all varieties, be they religious or secular, that there are no limits on the state's power or jurisdiction, and that rights are really just gifts bestowed by the state upon individuals, gifts that can be taken as well as given. To a very significant extent, the Human Rights Project at the end of World War II that culminated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was a reaction to the strong state monism of the Nazi regime, where state power trumped conscience and where the government invoked emergency powers to overcome claims to political and civil rights. The preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the very first words, begin, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." This initial recognition reflects the dualist intuition that there are interests weighty enough to be constituted inalienable rights, things the state is obliged to respect and protect. And then, in a passage that must be read against the vivid recent memory of Nazi and Japanese imperialist atrocities, the preamble to the UDHR continues, "Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind." In these words, we hear an echo of the conviction awakened by World War II, never again. The UDHR then declares in Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Note that this declaration posits a dualism that places limits on the state's authority. Human rights are said to be things with which all people are born, endowments based upon our human characteristics of reason and conscience, as well as our capacity to have genuine regard for each other. I suggest that the unease that many feel towards human rights is based upon an erosion of the strong commitment to dualism that underlay not just the human rights worldview, but most of Western history. This dualism is present in many forms and has undergone many instantiations. We find an early 5th century Augustinian version of it, the church as a spiritual city of God, in contrast with the material earthly city. St. Thomas Aquinas articulated another version with an emphasis on natural reason, natural theology, and natural law. We also see it in the idea of two swords, articulated in the papal bull Unum Sanctum, issued in 1302 by Pope Boniface VIII, with one sword being the spiritual sword controlled by the church and the temporal sword controlled by the state. A variation of this dualism is also found in Martin Luther and his two kingdoms doctrine, which held that God rules the world in two ways, the left-hand kingdom through secular law and churchly government, and the right-hand kingdom, his spiritual kingdom, through the gospel and grace. This dualism is expressly evident in John Locke. In the letter concerning toleration, Locke writes, "I esteem it above all things necessary to distinguish exactly the business of civil government from that of religion, and to settle the just bounds that lie between the one and the other. If this be not done, there can be no end put to the controversies that will be always arising between those that have, or at least pretend to have, on the one side, a concernment for the interest of men's souls, and on the other side, a care of the commonwealth." He goes on to say, "The commonwealth seems to me to be a society of men constituted only for procuring, preserving, and advancing of their own civil interests. Civil interests," he says, "I call life, liberty, health, and indolency of body, and the possession of outward things, such as money, lands, houses, furniture, and the like." By the time of the French and American revolutions, this dualism was an important defining feature of both revolutions and how they were conceptualized by the revolutionaries. The words of the Declaration of Independence are familiar worldwide. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Even the French Revolution, which was much more secular in orientation than the US Revolution, and much more a revolution against an established church than the American Revolution, expressed itself in similar natural law language that presumed a dualism with the state and religion representing different spheres or categories of social organization. Strongly influenced by the doctrines of natural reason, natural law, and natural rights, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen asserted that the rights of man are universal and valid at all times and in all places. Approved by the National Assembly of France on August 26, 1789, the preamble begins, "The representatives of the French people, organized as a national assembly, believing that the ignorance, neglect, or contempt of the rights of man are the sole cause of public calamities and the corruption of government, have determined to set forth in a solemn declaration the natural, unalienable, and sacred rights of man, in order that this declaration, being constantly before all the members of the social body, shall remind them continually of their rights and duties." Like the American Revolution, there is a powerful and pervasive dualism underlying this document. The rights declared are asserted to be natural, unalienable, and sacred, things with which we are born, and government is under a duty to protect these basic rights, including freedom of religion, freedom of association, and freedom of speech. Indeed, I would maintain that dualism is such a strong and axiomatic aspect of Western constitutional systems that we can hardly see it for what it is, a remarkable rejection of the monist alternatives, various forms of statism that might find themselves in strong alliance with a particular religion, such as Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church, or as exemplified increasingly today by Hindu nationalism in India. States who assert a posture of control over religion, such as China and its 5 recognized and state-sponsored and controlled official religions, or even states dedicated to the strict limitation of religion. Here I am thinking of the Soviet Union, or even the obliteration of religion, such as Soviet-era Albania. My thesis, or worry really, is that today we are engaged in an epical struggle between monism and dualism, between statist ideologies that do not recognize any power above and beyond the state, and dualist ideologies that base state legitimacy in large measure on the extent to which the state respects rights that precede and do not depend upon the state for recognition. The challenges to dualism today come from both the right and the left, including non-Western voices who assert that human rights are simply a Western invention and Western imposition. These are typically not the voices of the powerless, but of the powerful, typically those holding state power, who want to promote various nationalist or statist projects. As we've discussed in this conference, many of those voices are more specifically targeted at religious freedom itself. Progressive critiques, including some that are openly hostile to religion. But there is a more specific and sustained attack on not only religion, but religious freedom by those who find religion and those who defend religion in the name of religious freedom to be a backwards and benighted obstacle to their progressive visions of an equalitarian society dominated by non-discrimination norms. Never mind that those norms are also part of the Universal Human Rights Project. So one progressive strategy is to promote these non-discrimination norms to the exclusion of the freedom norms that also exist in human rights. not just freedom of religion, thought, conscience, and belief, but also freedom of speech, association, and assembly. In the U.S., at least, for the past 10 years or so, there has been a sustained and deliberate effort by the progressive left to pit religious freedom against non-discrimination. This is largely a product of the struggle over gay rights in general and gay marriage in particular. In demanding complete social acceptance of gay marriage, and any who oppose it on any grounds are quickly labeled as homophobic, and any who would seek conscientious exemptions from participating in it, including religious groups, religiously affiliated institutions, religious business owners, government employees, and even religious employees of secular businesses, are under tremendous pressure to be silent in all respects with any opposition to the sexual rights agenda. Last year, the issue was gay marriage. This year, it's transgender rights. As I try to understand the zeitgeist behind these efforts, it is apparent that the primary value is equality. The primary legal mechanism for achieving equality is non-discrimination laws, and the definition of discrimination rests on a kind of radical subjective hedonic subjectivism. I will only briefly address my third reason for thinking we should care about religious freedom. Without FoRB, there is no basis for protecting and respecting conscience. Recall that Article 1 of the UDHR identifies reason and conscience as two of the basic endowments that define us as human beings and the basis of human dignity. If the official ideology of dualism is some variation of natural reason and natural rights, the official ideology of monism is public reason, with its tendency to discount conscience, either significantly or altogether. The assertion that public reason is hostile to conscience needs some explaining. After all, the first public reason theorist was not John Rawls or even Immanuel Kant, it was Thomas Hobbes. And he was absolutely clear that the sovereign spoke in the voice of public reason, and subjects gave up their claims of conscience in exchange for the protection offered by the sovereign from the state of nature, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. Public reason, whether Hobbes's, Kant's, or Rawls', always makes the same initial primary normative move, differentiating between public reason and private reason, and crediting the one and discrediting the other, at least in matters of public life. The problem for those who value conscience is that it often speaks to us in registers that count paradigmatically as private reason. Consider the metaphors we use for conscience: a prick of the heart, a feeling in one's gut, a powerful internal or even sometimes external voice that declares to us, "Here I stand, I can do no other." These are not public reasons, they are private reasons. And public reason is committed to the marginalization of private reason. I overestimated what I could accomplish. Let me conclude. I could sense a growing wave of gratitude sweeping the room as I leafed the pages. Why should we care about religious freedom? If we care about human rights, about human dignity, I do not believe these normative constructs can survive if we deny freedom of human beings to live according to the dictates of their conscience. If we fear statism, monistic states that recognize no limits on their authority and view rights as gifts bestowed by the states, gifts that can also be taken back by the state, then we need something like a dualist outlook, which differentiates between the sphere of state authority and other spheres of non-state authority. The intellectual resources for a dualist understanding of limited state power are rooted historically and intellectually in religious ways of viewing the world. Without religion, I'm not sure we have the intellectual, moral, or philosophical resources to resist the imperial logic of statism. Finally, if we care about conscience, the existence of an inner feeling or voice that acts as a guide to the rightness and wrongness of our behavior, we must protect religious freedom. The justifications for the protection of conscience were first and foremost religious justifications. And so I believe there are reasons, many, but at least three: the care of human rights, the fear of statism, and the love of conscience, which make the work in which we're engaged not only meaningful, but necessary. Thank you. All right, I'd like to invite Raphael Paz, Aki Kurosawa, Jamie Russell, Yi-Hon Shu, and Justice Salike to come and take a seat up front. Cole, why don't you come up as well at this time? We've asked each of them to speak for 2 or 3 minutes, some final reflections about the symposium. After they are finished, we will invite Archbishop Del Rio, Vladimir Vardanyan, Helio Carnesale, Inkantha Pavi, and Akin Obe. So let's begin with our first panel. And Raphael, why don't we begin with you? You can either speak from your seat or come to the podium. Maybe speaking from the seat will be easier.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address the present delegates. And as I'm sure every one of us will do, I want to thank the Center, BYU, the Church of Latter-day Saints, for hosting us and granting us this opportunity to be exposed to the themes of religious liberty in a pluralistic world. I'm going to have a few minutes, so I put some notes down of things I wanted to make sure I got out today. First of all, I want to say, I come from a Caribbean island with wonderful beaches. And I'm saying that because that is a prevalent mentality in the society from where I'm from. We take things very easy until there is an imminent threat. And it's easy to listen to the things that have been said here, and part of me wants to react as that Caribbean islander and say, oh, I am so thankful that's not our story. But that would be foolish. One of the wonderful things that I walk out of here with as we board planes tomorrow and fly back is that you have allowed us to see what is up ahead. It is not about if, but rather when we face the same challenges for religious freedom that many of you are facing today in the countries and the societies that you represent. We have a popular saying in Spanish, and roughly translated it says that when you know there is a war, it's harder to kill the soldier, you know? And now we understand that there needs to be a sense of urgency on issues of protecting religious freedom and accelerating interreligious dialogue, which is frankly in its infancy where we are from. Second, I just want to thank you for allowing the expansion of vision that takes place during moments like this. One of the wonderful things you walk back with as well is a context for what's going on in your local community. When you start hearing what's going on in other places, the things that are going on at home make a little bit more sense. It's easier to judge them from a measured perspective, and we take that back as well. And the last thing I want to say is that I'm also very thankful for the richness of relationship. I believe that the plenary sessions and the breakout sessions have been wonderful, but also something else has gone on. And it's gone on outside of the formality of lectures and wonderful speakers. It's gone on at the lunch tables and the breakfast tables and the dinner tables. And just as an example, we were discussing the fact that in the Dominican Republic, we don't have legal framework for freedom of religion. We don't have any laws yet. And coincidentally, Jaime, who's sitting next to me from the motherland of Spain, who colonized us, and being part of the Ministry of Justice, right away just shot out at me and said, Rafi, this is how we're doing it. And he's given me papers and documents that I will take back. And as we meet in interreligious groups, we have a framework and even an unpaid consultant now to help us along in that process. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been a wonderful experience.
All right, let's go to Jamie Russell next.
Muchas gracias. Me van a permitir que utilice.
Thank you very much. You're going to allow me to utilize my mother tongue because my English is very poor, and I am not sure that I can transfer the concepts in the right way. And so I wanted to thank the Brigham Young University and their and the School of Law and their president, and the possibility of sharing and dialogue and to know diverse realities and experiences that have to do and that they are a consequence of the exercise of the religious freedom in all the world. They have asked me to transfer some of my impressions, and it's true that I haven't been able to be in every room, in all tables, but in those where I have been, there have been some ideas that have formulated all the meetings, and I would like to transfer that to you. And the first idea has to do with nobody doubts that the fundamental right of religious freedom, the first of the liberties, is a right that when it is exercised comes into collision with the other rights. The rights, as it can be the right to freedom of expression, the right of freedom of teaching, and of gathering and manifestation. So there are rights that have been recognized by the international treaties and that have been incorporated to most of the constitutions. But I think that the question here, the issue here, is not to recognize this freedom, the right of freedom of religion, but to guarantee that the application and the exercise of this right is effective, is real, and that the people, individuals can do it and communities can do it. For this, it's not enough to transfer the obligation to the governments, but it is also necessary that religions, they are obligated to guarantee this right to everybody. And in this way, the civil society and the governments, they have to become the guarantors of a right that have to be exercised by the individual, not only in the private sector, but also in the public sphere. And because of this, in this sense, I think it is necessary to rethink what is the value that we want to give to this group of rights that the international community has given in 1948, and what is the foundation of this. And I think that the foundation was set on the first day, on Sunday afternoon. It cannot be another one but human dignity, the concept of human dignity, that it is a concept that pre-exists to the right. It comes before that, and I think it has to be the central stone, that it has to be built on that, on the fundamental rights, a concept of the human dignity, that it is a common denominator in all the religions. I don't know any religion that doesn't believe in the concept, that doesn't defend the concept of human dignity, a concept of the human dignity from which I think we have to interpret the governments, civil society, and religions as and why we should guarantee to the individual and the communities the exercise of the right of exercise of freedom of religion. And I don't want to extend or expand this term, but it has to do with the exercise of this right and the projection in the public sphere. And it also has been spoken in this room and in different rooms about how it should be the different models of freedom of religion in terms of different administrations, the separatist models or the cooperation models. I'm not going to discuss if one model is better than another, but there is an evident reality, and it is that there is a presence of the religious even bigger in society that we cannot deny. The individual is a citizen, but is also a believer. And because of this, I think that it has to be or develop within the society. The concept of citizenship has in itself the right of the freedom of religion. And from my position, from the public administration as a government representative, I think it has this reality. Religions are an element, a factor that is necessary, but not only the majorities, but also the minorities. Therefore, it is necessary that from the administration, we can give voices to the majorities, but also to the minorities. I think that we have to apply, and we have talked about this at some point, the models of ordinances, as the European Union has said in their white book, where religions can participate together with the administrations when they have to regulate about issues that can affect them. And I think that construction and the dialogue space cannot be only in academic places like it is here, but also it should be in places, in religious places, but also it has to be transferred to the administration. So in this way, I think that religions have to become in the stars of this concept of citizenship in which any group, any individual can exercise their fundamental right of religious freedom. Thank you very much.
Professor Xu.
Professor Xu.
The symposium organizers asked me
Los organizadores
about this symposium, representing the participants from China. I think I'm old enough to represent. Well, I would like to use this opportunity to express our gratitude to the International Center for Religion and Law Studies, once again, for their kind invitation, hospitality, and superb arrangements. I hope that we can return your VIP treatment someday in the future in our own country. There's an old saying in China. There are lots of old sayings in China. There is no endless banquet, and there must be a place and time for us to say goodbye. But I believe that if the religious persecution, suppression, conflict, and discrimination continue, I think they will. There will be another, such mechanism, must be such a mechanism, such as this symposium, to continue this important discussion of religious rights. So there is an endless struggle for religious freedom. China is usually a sitting duck for this kind of gathering, and you are too kind to identify us as such a target. As we always tell our government, that in the fight for religious freedom, China and the Western countries, especially the United States, are not adversaries, but comrades in arms. Our government officials are truly sometimes ignorant and stupid in identifying themselves as the opponents of this important international campaign for religious freedom. Western critics tend to be a little bit impatient or even a little bit fussy in pushing this religious freedom issue in China. I think Chinese government or China has its own timetable and agenda on this issue. Actually, a lot of good things happen in China in this area of religion. China now is the largest Bible exporting country in the world. China supplies 95% of the Christmas gifts in the world. Actually, the Christmas season is approaching. A typical Chinese university offers more courses on religion and religious studies than a typical American university, not to mention those state universities. A religious China, or a believing China, as the phrase I coined a couple of years ago, is emerging alongside with the rise of China as the economical powerhouse of the world. Another older saying in China, that is, the religious situation, reputation in China is like a horse which is sold at the price of the donkey. This horse might be sick or crippled, but horse is a horse. Horse is cheaper than a donkey in Utah, I don't know. Finally, we do have learned a great deal from all the participants of the symposium, especially from giants like the author of the Facilitating Religious Freedom and Belief textbook, which becomes truly an ideal tool for our students to iron their trousers. When we return, we should share and digest the information we gathered here, and it won't be too difficult a task since we have a common interest on this important issue of religious freedom. The symposium will soon end, but the campaign, fight, and the struggle and the study will just begin. Religious freedom scholars and fighters, let us join hand and march on. Thank you.
Justice Salike.
Thank you very much. I am also indebted to the organizers of the conference for inviting us and for bringing us all the way from the Pacific, Papua New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand, Samoa, to be here with you. We probably came with a enclosed mind to this symposium because we don't have, like the Caribbeans, we don't have those issues as we found out here. But as I said, we thank you for bringing us here, because from here we are going back with an open mind that yes, indeed, those issues are universal, and that they're not just in the countries that we've heard, that they are not just only in those countries, but they are universal, and we must prepare for those times if and when they do arrive at our shores. And we want to thank the organizers for bringing us here. Indeed, religious liberty, religious freedom, beliefs are all universal, and that we take them to heart so that they are protected in every way possible, even if they have to be enshrined in our various constitutions of the countries. Yeah, we will hold fast to those, we will embrace them. And we in the Pacific will say, yes, we are prepared to work along with the international community to protect human rights, to protect religious freedom and beliefs. And we only ask that those who come to our shores will also recognize and accept our customs and our traditions, and that they will not try to impose upon us their traditions and their beliefs. We want to work side by side with everybody else so that there is no conflict, and that so there is no animosities created in our country or our countries. And so thank you to the organizers. We want to say thank you to those who worked at the background scenes, like Deborah Knight. We want to give you special thanks. Please pass our special thanks to Deborah Knight for working that very hard to bring us here, and to the volunteer students who have worked beyond your, we can really appreciate and understand the efforts they have put. The person who actually picked me up, Joshua, I missed my flight, but he was there at the airport. Joshua, if you're here, thank you for waiting, having that patience to wait for me. I should have arrived at 5 o'clock, but I arrived instead at 10 o'clock, and so he had to wait those extra hours to wait for me to pick me up and bring me to the hotel. And so I thank you. That's the dedication and the commitment of your students, and they are a credit to the institution and to the Center for Law and Religion, Religious Studies. Thank you for all that you've done for us. As I said, as a judge, if the issue for me to determine was whether the mission of the International Center for Religion and Law and Religious Studies, if the verdict is to be given yes, as the judge and the jury, I would say yes, you are indeed achieving your mission statement. Your mission statement that you have. You're indeed achieving your mission statement, and so I would commend the center for that. Thank you.
Professor Kitazawa.
Okay. I'm sorry, I cannot speak English fluently, so I'd like to say in Japanese. はじめにこちらのシンポジウム
First, I would like to show my appreciation for inviting me to this. And I would like to show my appreciation to to all the staff at the law school and all the students who worked for this, and also to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. When I was first invited to this center, I heard that the theme was, I was asked to give a presentation on religion and freedom. And my specialty is private law. So if a person is a specialist in the constitutional law, those people would be always thinking about those religion and freedom and such. However, the constitutional law belongs to the public law, but my private international law specialty belongs to civil law, private law. So generally speaking, the freedom of religion is not something that I have been studying seriously. However, I spent 3 days at this conference, and my understanding and my perception have changed quite a bit. I have learned that depending on because of the conflicts from the religious conflicts, that the disruption to the citizens' life occurs, and it affects everybody's life. From my point of view, the international marriage and also people wanting to be cohabitating in Japan, I deal with those the issues, how to deal with them in the laws, and also the same-sex marriage. I am wondering how this is same-sex marriage is handled in our law, and of course, when, for instance, somebody from Islamic country of that has that Islamic faith wants to marry a Japanese person who supposed to be a Buddhist country, but how do we deal with the religious differences of those two people? So that's something that has come up in the recent years. For instance, in one religion, does not allow divorce. And in Japan, the divorce is possible. So there's also conflicts whether this person can actually get divorced or not. So through this attendance in the conference, I have realized that the religious freedom of religion and religious the understanding is very important in my specialty also. Under Constitution, we all think that the freedom of religion is considered, and we will take it for granted. In Japan,
非常に先鋭化して議論として問題となるということは少ないと言わざる
the freedom of religion doesn't come up in the court, and for the judge to decide whether or not one is being under attack or experiencing discrimination because of religion. But I hope I will be able to contribute to this discussion from my specialty. And about Professor Scharffs, I arrived in Salt Lake City in the evening. I met him for the first time, and he took myself and my husband to a football game, the BYU and the Toledo game, and it was a very interesting experience. And while I was walking on campus, a lot of students talked to me and said, "Could I help you?" A lot of people asked me if they could be of any assistance, and I thought I was impressed that they are so helpful, and how that anyone can create students like this. So, and I really thank you all again for having us come to attend this wonderful conference.
Thank you all very much. We don't create our students, we just try not to ruin them. That's hard enough for us as educators. All right, let me thank our panel and let you return to your seats. And I will invite Archbishop Del Rio, Vladimir Vardanyan, Helio Carnasale, Inga Pavi, and Aiken Obe to please come up. Now, I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to need you to exercise the same restraint I exercised and eliminate 1/3 of what you hope to say so that we can save some minutes for Professor Durham as we conclude. So, Archbishop Del Rio, let's begin with you.
Me uno al agradecimiento. ¿Se escucha? Ok, ahora sí.
Okay.
Me uno al agradecimiento a los que han organizado y trabajado en la realización de este simposio.
So I want to thank to all of you, and in a special way to my brother and friend, the Director of Public Affairs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Peru, that he invited me to participate in this event. It's been wonderful to share these days with all of you, my brothers and sisters from different nations, from different religious confessions and professional specialties as well as governments and in civil areas. I have come to find out that the conferences have been very interesting, and the innovations as well. And it has been in particularly grateful for me to experience the communion among us. I have a lot of things in mind and in my heart that I'm taking with me. I'm not going to mention them all, so don't worry about it, because I know we don't have time. But I want to highlight some of them. First, the necessity to pray. To pray for all of you, and in a very special way, for all of those that in which countries they are not living the freedom of religion, and they are going through difficult times at this time. And that's the first thing, and that's the first intention that I'm taking with me, prayer. Second, to promote in a very efficient way, not with just the word, but also with concrete actions, the freedom of religion, that is also the emanation starts to be attacked, in our case, not by the state, but by the ideology of the gender that is taking certain strength in Peru, but also to impose. They have started attacking to the different religious confessions, and in first, the Catholic Church, like many of you know, it is the one that the Peruvian people profess the most. So second, promote freedom of religion with word and with actions. Third, promote the communion among the different denominations, religions. In my country, there's very little that has been done when it comes to the dialogue and with the communion against the different denominations. Something was done, but very little. Like I said, my position here yesterday in Arequipa, Peru, we just recently created the Inner Religious Committee. And I have been participating actively in some actions of this particular committee. But I come back with the intention to promote even more this action together and prayer as well. And in concrete, I also take this initiative, and before mentioning this initiative, I like to tell you something. Not too long ago, in Israel, there were some rabbis and some priests. Some rabbi mentioned something, a story. The rabbi asked the other, he asked him, Jose, do you love me? And the other mentioned, Samuel, of course I love you, we are brothers. Are you sure that you love me? And Jose said, of course I love you. We have grown together, our families are close together, we were together when your mother passed, etc., etc. And then he said, so if you love me, why do I suffer? Do you know what my deepest suffering is? And the other said, he just looked at him and said, you're right. You're right, I don't love you. I don't love you enough. I don't know what are the reasons of your deep sufferings. Why do I tell you this? Because an action, a concrete action, is to act promptly, which is in Arequipa, I have to have a platform, which is a brotherly platform for the youth, inner religious youth platform. I work with the youth a lot, and I think that it's very important that the youth of different religious communities that basically they're all Christians, they can start getting to know each other and love each other from youth. And that's why we are lacking the dialogue and the union. And at last, on these days, also, there's been a lot of, it's been in my heart and in my mind a lot, that God is not a doctrine. God is love. Catholics, we have a hymn in Latin that says,
Deus ibi est. Donde esté el amor,
where love is, God is. Experiencing love in these days, I have experienced it with you, among you, and I want to thank God because He's been here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Del Rio. Let's next hear from Vladimir Vardanyan.
Good evening, everybody. Unfortunately, I'm from the country which didn't colonize any other country, so I may go ahead. If somebody will ask me a question, how would you describe the conference in one word? I will answer provocative. This is due to Professor Bilenfeld, who really shaped the mainstream of discussions of this conference, and thank you, a special thank you for you, Professor, for this. So I think that participation of a lot of professors and professionals with different backgrounds, historians, lawyers, religious study experts and so on, as well as state officials, religious institutions, NGOs, and so on, really allow us to penetrate in all the necessary layers of the freedom of religion and belief. And this is very important since we speak about very important component of the universal system of human rights protection. Very often we listen during this conference to the following question: do we need the freedom of religion or belief? Might it be substituted with other freedoms or fundamental human rights? For example, the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Usually when I lectured at the university, I use the following example. I asked my students the following question: what do you think? What is the main detail? What is the main part of the watch mechanism? There are a lot of, usually I got a lot of different answers, but there is only one answer, one correct answer. All the parts of the watch mechanism are important because it is a single, unique system, single, unique mechanism. And if one part is broken, all the mechanism is broken. The same with the human rights system. Universal human rights system is a unique joint mechanism. And it is impossible to separate freedom of religion and beliefs from the other fundamental human rights. We are interconnected, interlinked, and we exist in this way. So when we speak about freedom of religion or belief, we should take into account that this is a part of the joint system, and we should go ahead with this understanding of the freedom of religion and belief. Everybody agree that it is self-evident that all the people are equal. But I would like to ask maybe a very naive question. What is human being? The main problem we face now in the very beginning of the 21st century is the fact that some religious groups are dehumanized. And this is the main basis of denial of the right of religion or belief. I don't want to refer to medieval professor of University of Salamanca, Francisco de Vitoria, who did his best to show that the native population of Latin America has the same unalienable rights, but it was in middle century. But now in 21st century we still have this problem, especially in the Middle East. And we should speak about this. We should speak about the necessity to provide the necessary environment of non-dehumanization. And you know perfectly well today we touch upon this issue that the genocide is impossible without dehumanization of human group. And we speak about the instruments for the prevention of the crime of genocide intended against the religious group. But we very often forgotten that despite the fact that the convention called the Convention on Prevention and of the Crime of Genocide, but it's rather a monument to the crimes committed before than a real tool for the prevention, because yes, now, God bless, we have international mechanisms for condemnation of such crimes. We have International Criminal Court, we have tribunals for Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, but we haven't any system of early prevention of dehumanization, early prevention of such crimes worldwide. I will follow your suggestion and just try to conclude. First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the organizers of this conference. And I would like to say, just as a postscriptum of what I said, that it's very important that, in my humble opinion, we face here the following convergence between the convergence in understanding of freedom of religious and belief, both from secular and religious perspective. This means that we are on the right path, and we are go ahead with the understanding which we should do our best for the better protection and further promotion of freedom of religious and belief worldwide. Thank you.
Helio Carnasale.
I ask you permission to speak in my language, Portuguese. Há uma palavra
There's a
que
word that defines in my heart my feelings regarding of everything that happened here today. Truly, since the first contacts with my people in Brazil, and after through the emails, that is enchantment. It was beyond my expectations, and all the aspects that have been mentioned here. They will be in my heart, in my memory forever. And beyond my enchantment that was mentioned here, another word can be added, which is reflection. Enchantment, provocative, and those words defines everything that we have seen and listened and experienced since that we came, and for sure we will see in the future. I don't want only to speak about my own impression, but also for the organization that I represent, which is the Adventist Church of the Seventh Day. We are creationists. We believe in the creation action of God, and thus we believe that God trusts us, and through His grace, with the liberty of choice, and this make us equal as human beings, from east to west, north and south, independent of race, color, culture. And this is one of the most important gifts that we have. And as Christians, Adventists, we stand up to protect, defend, and to promote religious liberty. And we believe that not only exclusive, of course not, but an inclusive liberty, religious liberty for all. And we want to hold hands to all men and women of good in this land. It doesn't matter of government, religious entities, even those who have ideologies and philosophies different from ours. We to the simple ones, to the professors, we renew publicly in this symposium our desire to promote and defend the religious liberty through our institution, which is an international association, which is the oldest institution existed in the world that defends liberty of religion, which we are so proud to have Dr. Durham as part of the members of our council, directive council, of the panel of specialists and other people also. Our organization is maintained by the church, but doesn't have any color, doesn't have any fingerprint of our beliefs, but the flag of the religion, freedom of religion. I would like also to, we are united to all men and women of good to fulfill this ideal. I'm going home also with a deep reflection, but one in special. We have here men and women with a great brightness, very intelligent. The studies and researches that was done and practices that and the efforts that we're doing. We saw people that are together, they're united to United Nations community, European community, and I don't know how we can be more united than what we have been united in practices. Not only maybe we not be able to be together in the high courts of government, but I believe that this is a legacy that this symposium it's bringing to each one of us, that we can, within the spheres of our influence, if I cannot embrace the whole world or the United Nations or the European community, I can go to Arequipa, for example, in Argentina, whatever, I'm close in my country, and we can create connections to approach us and really be united, and not only on the discourse, but more in practice. I know that each one of us, we have our own battles, that our leaders, our priests and members, that they have the vision more open, more pure, what it means to be united. We all have our own issues that we needed to fight. But here we are a step ahead with a better vision, with a more open mind, and it requires from us to take the first steps to take care of our internal aspects, but also to move ahead with no fear, so that we may be together or will be hanged separately. And this is a reality. We need that the discourse of union move out of talking and be more practical, that the change may start with us, with me, from now on, so the things may happen. I'm so give my deepest word of gratitude to all the aspects of this organization, for all of those who work. Dr. Brett already said in a beautiful way. So my closest neighbors, McAllister, Ney in Brazil, and others of Argentina, Peru, which we have a very close relationship, and now to all the organizers of this symposium. May God bless you, and that we may go home not only with enchantment, with provocative and reflection, but with a desire to do something together. Thank you very much.
Kantha Paviing.
Thank you. Primeiro, eu gostaria de falar from Convent, eu gostaria de também agradecer, principalmente for your invitation. I am not a specialist in religion and laws. I am a medical doctor working for women's rights. How we can protect, how we can empower women and protect their rights. And I come also from a country where you have said there was a genocide in the 1970s, and the genocide for the reason of ideology. And of course, we say always, all the time, never again. But unfortunately, it happened again. And this is for any reason, unfortunately, we don't learn from our previous lesson. And I hope that what the government of Cambodia tried to do now is to promote the culture of peace. And I come also from a country where the freedom of religion is respected and protected by the law. And this is what we try to do in order to have this cohesion, in our society and not having a trigger. I remember what you said, this morning that in Nigeria is like a trigger for Africa. If Nigeria blows up, Africa blows up also. So we don't want Cambodia again blow up in that way. So what we try to do is how we can keep this freedom of religion and make it protected by the law. But what I learned from this lesson also is I think that what I learned, and I learned a lot because you have different angle of approach when you talk about freedom of religion, of human rights, human dignity, and human needs. This is something we have also to look at. And what I saw at this time of we call mass population movement, violent conflict, human rights abuse, and hateful rhetoric you see all the time in the TV. You know, I think that this protection of freedom of religion is a need. And you say it's a grandfather of, we can call maybe the grandfather of human rights. But as I am an activist for women's rights, we can also say grandmother of human rights. But we need to be partial. We need to be impartial. We need to be impartial. So we say grandparents of human rights. Please. Okay, I prefer these grandparents of human rights. And of course, the prohibition of religious-based discrimination should be enforced to ensure the respect of human rights, human dignity, especially human dignity. This is what we see in Syria now. And we witness this, and I am a little bit discouraged by our government. What are we doing when we are watching people in Syria dying every day, you know, in Aleppo city? This is something we need to look at ourselves. And of course, how we can promote peace worldwide. Inter-religious cooperation for peace, interfaith dialogue. I learned this. I learned from the different sessions. And also religious dialogue should be also promoted and based, and also should be also based on recognition and practice of common and positive values, not bad practice. Like I think that you will say about your experience in Nigeria. I was discouraged when I asked Professor this morning, what should we do when the girl child were adopted and by Boko Haram, or a senator take a bride which is 12 years old, you know, and based on the customary law which prevail on the constitution law, what should we do? And this is for the women's right and for the girls' right. How should we do? The question is, question mark, how do we do? This is something I was shocked this morning when I learned this. So the contribution of religion in also, I think that interfaith dialogue, religious dialogue should be promoted and based on recognition and practice of common positive values. In addition, dialogue and cooperation also between religious and non-religious people are equally important because you have to deal with all those people also. The contribution also of religion in social welfare and enforcement of laws and policies contribute to promote social cohesion and social justice. And especially in that way, religious leaders can be fundamental allies for implementations of laws and policies and therefore contribute to solve social problems. And from the gender perspective, religion can contribute to the advancement of gender equality and promotion of women's rights and girls' rights, which are human rights, to be protected for the sake of healthy families, which are considered as the base of a prosperous community and society as a whole. And then, of course, when you are prosperous, when you are, it's a peaceful society, so it's peace worldwide. And I believe that religion and the incommensurable contribution to societies must not only be acknowledged by laws and policies, but also protected and supported by them. On the other hand, all these good contributions of religion to societies must also be highlighted in order to raise public knowledge about the importance of religion and also the need of protecting the religious rights. Thank you.
Professor Aiken Ipidape Obe.
We have a saying in Africa, and what we say is, when you mature, you start to do great things. At 23, I want to suggest to all of us that the Symposium has matured wonderfully. It has done so well in terms of gathering the diversity of religions, diversity of nationalities, diversity of gender and races, that indeed, at this point, we can call it the United Nations of Law and Religion. With two important differences. We do not attack China, neither do we attack the United States, neither do we attack each other. As a matter of fact, the spirit of this symposium, of this gathering, I used to call it a movement, but I now want to call it the Law and Religion family. We are a family because we listen with our hearts and our souls. We embrace ideas and opinions, and we have a very strong and, if you like, instinctive respect for all the ideas that we have had. So we have learned a lot. I also want to suggest that the way that the symposium and the center have been organized and the benefits we have derived, I want to think of all of us as pilgrims. And I want to look at Provo now as the Mecca of law and religion. So we thank you. The symposium has been very wonderful. The plenary sessions have been great. And you know that the themes are general, and then we have the breakout sessions. And this time around, it's been so wonderful. There are some countries that you are interested in, and because the breakout sessions are now on the country schematics, you are just able to walk into Myanmar, as I did, and learn about Sukyi and the monks, or go to Nigeria, where she was, and she put me to task so seriously, asking so many questions, but I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, organizers. We are happy to be here.
Okay, let me invite our panelists to return, and Professor Durham, let me give the floor to you for some closing reflections. Please feel free to take at least 15 minutes. We don't have anything else scheduled, so we're...
Well, first of all, I have to say I have learned so many things, and among other things, I'm going to have a new perspective on the religiosity of China when the Christmas presents start flowing in. Brett and I have been very busy, and both of us probably finalized what we were going to say shortly before coming here. I was a little late because I was slower. And I got here and I started listening to his talk, and I started scratching out parts of mine because we think a lot alike. He thinks better in many ways, but the real question, I'm going to be excited to see after the conference whether what's left in my talk is actually in those missing pages of his. Probably not, but it's possible. There were a lot of overlaps. So at the beginning of this conference, Heiner Bielefeld challenged us to be provoked. He talked of ways that freedom of religion or belief is a provocation to states, to religious communities, to the West. And of course, it was a challenge to each of us. to be provoked. But in what sense? If one studies the use of the word provoked, I actually looked it up in the Bible today, it turns out there are many passages in which people, and even and especially God, are provoked to anger. Sometimes people are provoked to fear. I've come to believe that many of the worst violations of religious freedom rights in particular and human rights in general result are when people are provoked to anger or fear. They then react in ways that are motivated by self-defense or defense of others or defense of nation or community, but too often their response causes even greater anger and fear and even greater polarization, and too often this results in discrimination, violence, crime, and even genocide. I was struck this morning in looking up some of the passages, this use of this word, with one particular passage from the Epistle of Hebrews, which says, "Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and good works." And I suspect that that may be more what Heiner had in mind. That is that one of my hopes is that people can take time now, maybe even if I leave any time between now and dinner, to write some things down that you've felt prompted to do as a result of being here. We need to be provoked not to anger or fear, but to responsibility, as Jan Fiegel encouraged us this morning, to sensitive and caring action, to stand not only for our own communities, but to stand with others outside our circle, to hear their cry, and to respond with sensitivity, caring, and help that goes beyond Hollywood and superficial answers to the forging of deep and lasting solutions. I've been struck by many images during this conference. One was an image from Simon McCrossan's presentation, the first plenary. I'm sort of haunted by that image from Tolkien. The world has changed, I can feel it in the water, in the air, and so forth. But this is one of the things that I'm leaving in that Brett picked up on, and that is the image of being a cut flower culture. The idea is that flowers cut from their roots will wither, and there is the initial beauty, the fragile bloom, but without roots, it will wither, and the world will change. And I'm really struck by that. I think Brett did a wonderful job of talking about some of the risks of the way. And while it's true that all the parts of the watch are important, sometimes if we lose the root, we'll lose more than we know. That's what worries me. I think particularly in this country, but in many countries, we've become so used to having freedom of religion that we sort of take it advantage as part of the air that we breathe, and we don't quite realize what other things will unravel if it does. I've often said that freedom of religion or belief is foundational in several ways. It's historically foundational because so many other rights emerged as additional supports for or expansions of legal protections originally provided in the name of freedom of religion. It's philosophically foundational because it protects the comprehensive belief systems and worldviews in which our other ideas are rooted and from which they derive their meaning. It's institutionally foundational because it protects and fosters the institutions that engender the vision, the motivation, and moral support that translate religious and moral ideals into personal and communal practice. It often overlaps with other rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom of association, rights to non-discrimination, rights to protection of an intimate or private sphere, and so forth. But its sum is greater than its individual parts. Finally, it's empirically foundational. It's a principle of tremendous social leverage. There's now extensive empirical evidence that a country's performance in protecting religious freedom correlates not only with protection of other key rights, such as freedom of speech and non-discrimination, but also with other social goods that are vital to sustainable development in the fullest and richest sense. Freedom of religion or belief is not only a criterion of justice, it is central to life lived abundantly. And I want to tell just a couple of stories to sort of round things out. Over 30 years ago, I attended the World Conference of Human Rights held in Vienna in June of 1993. On June 25th, the 171 attending states adopted by consensus the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. One of the provisions of that document has become a kind of mantra in international human rights circles. Quote, all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated. The international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equal manner on the same footing with the same emphasis. I both agree and disagree with that statement, because it's true that human rights, like the watch, all fit together and they mutually support each other. But in another sense, there are some things that are central that if you lose them, you lose something fundamental. So this is a reminder that one needs to remember and take seriously the broad array of rights, but some are more foundational, more central, and if they're neglected, the center will not hold, and the initial bloom of human rights will wither like cut flowers. Probably my most vivid memory of the World Conference on Human Rights was a session at which the former US President Jimmy Carter was invited to speak. There's probably no president of the United States who has been more committed to human rights than Jimmy Carter. The United States signed the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights during his administration. It took another 15 years to ratify, but that's another story. I have to say he's been remarkable, whatever your party background, I mean, he's been a president who's used his library. They all get libraries, but he's used his more effectively in the service of human rights than any of the other presidents. The United States, but at the session where he was supposed to speak, demonstrators shouted him down. I see some of the others of you may have been there. And they wouldn't let him speak. They're using their speech rights, I think, in an abuse of speech to block speech. Now, my point in telling this sad tale is that sometimes people being provoked by something or other, and I was never quite sure what they were so provoked by. I mean, I have a friend that often says that the United States leads by irritation, and I suppose that's part of what it was about. But it was the wrong person to choose. And there's a risk that if we're provoked in the wrong way, we can end up abusing rights rather than finding solutions. Now, the Carter story is not really about religious freedom, but it's representative of a growing challenge that religious rights will face in a pluralistic world. And I just skipped a page here. You can't see it because it's only half a page. It's not that the other rights are not important, but that fostering the blooming of other rights should not be accompanied by cutting off protection for religious freedom rights. So again, we should be provoked, but it will be better if we are provoked in the sense of being stimulated and perhaps provoked unto love and good works. This can take a lot of forms. We need to be provoked to engage in dialogue that is genuine and deep. Dialogue between elites is not meaningful if it is not carried to the level of grassroots and neighborhoods. So think of your own neighborhoods when you go home. Also, we cannot be satisfied with forms of interaction that have the form of dialogue but lack its substance. Too often, I have seen dialogues in which the dialogue partners discuss some other group that is really annoying or irritating and that they don't like, but who are not invited to the dialogue. This seems counterproductive at best and really problematic in worst. These are dialogues in form, but not in substance. We need to be provoked to dialogue that is more than monologue and that ultimately takes on the form of shared actions. We need to focus as much, if not more, on diapraxis, on working together. We need to be provoked to step out of our own circles and to pay attention to the needs of others. It's good for us to step out of our disciplinary specialties, like our colleague from Japan or from the doctor from Cambodia. We need to realize that these things have broader implications. I'm conscious these days that we're seeing some new domains in which we have to think about some of these issues. 3 weeks ago, I was at a conference in Windsor Castle where we met with a group of Yazidi leaders who were pleading for help. One of the things I was provoked to do then was to make a commitment that I would speak about their plight on upcoming occasions, and so I'm doing that here. We heard about the plight of this ancient group that is one of many tragic victims of the genocide going on in the Middle East. We were given a millennium-long history of the pogroms against Yazidis, of which the current catastrophe is part of a recurring cycle. I think all of us sitting there thought of our feelings leaving the various Holocaust museums of this world and saying to ourselves, being deeply provoked, never again, and then saying to ourselves, listening to the Yazidis, not again, not again. One of the striking features of the conference on Yazidis is the analysis they provided of how what they are suffering has been replicated again and again in other genocides. It's not just the savagery of the killing, but something that had not really sunk in before to me until I listened to the abuse of women, the selling of them into slavery, the trafficking, as well as torture, and sending human beings into blackness from which some never return, choosing suicide rather than continued life in the blackness. We're facing a refugee crisis of proportion that exceeds in scale and magnitude anything we have seen for decades and perhaps ever. We had one of the people at this conference talked about how she had been, or at a different conference, how she had been in charge of refugee issues in Turkey. And she started in about 2010 when they were overwhelmed with about 20 or 30,000 refugees. And by the time she left, they had 3 million. And what people need in that context, they need their religion. They need for that to be dealt with respect. This is one of the reasons I saw more clearly than ever before why freedom of religion is a non-derogable right. It is especially critical in times of emergency. These are vulnerable people, and the people giving aid are often religious people, and they need to think about how to be sensitive. I've been very impressed with our human rights people in the church. Sharon Eubank was there at Windsor Castle, and I've been in sessions with her in which she's talked about how do we give the aid that needs to be given and do it in a responsible way that is not taking advantage of vulnerable people, that's not trying to do inappropriate proselytism and so forth. I mean, these are questions that are coming up in a new context, an urgent context that we need to be able to think about. It's another area where we need to be provoked. We need to find ways of responding to these kinds of crises that don't lead, as Heiner Bielefeld said this morning, either to fatalism or cynicism. We also need to be able to look deeply at our institutions with the added focus of the critical lenses. I'm thinking, for example, of the insights provided by Sahar Aziz's analysis of how treatment of Muslims in America is fitting into a recurring pattern of racism. We need to be able to take tough and deepened look at ourselves, but we also need to be careful in developing such insights that we do not undermine the legitimacy of the best efforts of imperfect human beings to find the best solutions they can see at their time and place. We need to be critical. We also need to be critical of solutions, but we can't afford to be paralyzed into inaction or cynicism and so forth. We need to assimilate critique of our institutions while understanding also how far we have come and how we can apply what we have learned in moving toward a better future. We need to understand that being provoked is a first step, but it doesn't carry automatic answers. Often the best we can hope for is partial answers worked out with people of deeply differing beliefs, and we need to treasure those times of sharing, which is part of why we treasure this time with you. For the past few days, we've had a chance to spend time with others sensitive to the importance of human rights and to the foundational and central character of freedom of religion or belief, and to human dignity. Our hope is that we have strengthened our sense of how vital religious rights are in a pluralistic world. I hope we've been reminded that when we hear the mantra that all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated, we will remember that this is particularly true for religion or belief. For getting this right as we try to implement others is deeply hazardous. Human dignity has a deep spiritual dimension, and we cannot hope to protect dignity fully if we forget that profound dimension. Having the opportunity to join with you for the intense hours, and we apologize a little bit for the intensity, but not too much. The intensity hours of the last few days has enabled us to learn much, to establish ties that we really hope will last, and to expand our experience of the treasure of shared striving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Durham, and thanks to the 10 delegates who spoke on behalf of everyone with some of their thoughts and reflections on the symposium. Our apologies that we weren't able to include everyone in those concluding remarks, but the trade-off is we now get to have an hour-and-a-half break. So we will meet you at 7 p.m. in the ballroom of the Marriott Hotel for dinner. And the other important time to remember is tomorrow morning, the departure from the hotel is at 7:30 a.m. So 7 p.m. for dinner, departure tomorrow morning at 7:30. Let me ask you to join us in one last.
Oh, let me just add one thing that as we've done in prior years, I'm not absolutely sure it's been done this year, but if they give you colored labels to put on your luggage, use them. And I'm saying this now while we have translation, because what will happen tomorrow, those will sort you who's going where, and you want your luggage to end up with you at the end of the day. So I'm not, you'll get, if I'm wrong on that, I'll be corrected. But if I'm right, it's really important.
Thank you all very much.